So Saints quarterback Derek Carr unexpectedly retired over the weekend, and in today's video, I'm going to share why this reportedly happened, but also take a look at several other possibilities being floated around right now because Carr left a lot of guaranteed money on the table, and some are convinced there's more to this story than meets the eye. Then the Trey Hendrickson situation isn't getting any better, and we now know who's playing in the season opener. So let's talk about all that and more right after. Alright, we got a lot to get into today, starting with the biggest news that happened over the weekend. Pretty unexpected news to me and many around the NFL, and that was Saints quarterback Derek Carr is retiring at just 34 years old. We knew that he was dealing with a shoulder injury that potentially might have required surgery, and that would put his 2025 season in jeopardy, but nobody thought retirement was actually on the table. There's all kinds of speculation on what ultimately drove this decision, and we'll get into a couple of interesting theories here in a second. But first, here's what we do know. Carr missed the last 4 games of the season with a wrist injury, but said he didn't know the severity of the shoulder injury right away because he wasn't doing any actually throwing sessions as his wrist was recovering. Then late March, he had his first significant throwing session of the offseason, but he experienced pain in his throwing shoulder. From there, that's when reports came out that he met with the Saints team doctors multiple times and was still weighing whether or not to get surgery on that shoulder. So that's the decision we thought we were all waiting for. Will Carr try and gut through this season, or will he opt for surgery, which meant he would most likely miss a good chunk of the season or even potentially all of it? What the public didn't know, though, was that Carr got his shoulder scanned and the MRI revealed a labral tear and, quote, significant degenerative changes to his rotator cuff. So that's when we, as the public, were all a bit blindsided by Carr's retirement. This is far from the first time he's had shoulder issues in his throwing arm, and it looks like it's supposedly beyond repair, and therefore he can no longer throw with that arm, at least at a high level, a level needed in the NFL. After getting the results of those scans, he did reportedly take an injection for the injury in his shoulder and even tried to rehab through it, but after it was determined surgery was needed to fully repair that shoulder, Carr consulted with his wife, and they determined the best course of action was to go ahead and retire, making a very brief retirement announcement through the Saints. Maybe something more official will come in the coming days via a press conference or something, but for now, this is what we have. And before I get into a couple of speculative theories here about Derek Carr and his future, I myself have had 2 labrum surgeries on my left shoulder, which is my throwing arm. I don't play in the NFL, nothing. I just play backyard football, okay? But those surgeries were very hard to recover from, and I still feel the effects to them to this day. So it's pretty safe to say that if Derek Carr had to go under the knife again for the second time, I believe, on his same arm, the throwing shoulder, that there's a real chance he would just never be able to play and perform at a high level. Let's get into the speculative theories, though. They began to surface after he announced his retirement, and some believe there's more to this situation than meets the eye. I even saw something along the lines of the Saints and Derek Carr just having massive disagreements about the future because there's a new head coach there and all kinds of stuff. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I have a couple others that I think are more realistic and worth going down without as much speculation. By retiring this offseason, Derek Carr is giving up $30 million that he would have made via his base salary for the 2025 season. So some people are looking at this and wondering why the heck he wouldn't just get surgery and hang out all season on IR and get all that money. It was fully guaranteed after all. So even if he was out all year, he still would have earned it. To be clear, he did receive a $10 million roster bonus back in March, and he will get to keep that. So that's at least something, but it's certainly not $30 million. Ari Meirov thinks Derek Carr may have wanted to have more control over his own recovery process and take all the time he needs, whereas if he was still with the team, everything is done in collaboration with their doctors, and they map out the recovery process and return timeline. I mean, okay, I guess. I mean, I would personally be fine following the Saints doctors' orders and their timeline for recovery for an extra $20 million. But Derek Carr has already made over $200 million in his NFL career, so maybe he just thought it wasn't worth going back under the knife and trying again. Maybe it's as simple as that, or maybe the Saints could have tried to contest the timeline of his shoulder injury. Carr said he thinks his shoulder was injured on the same exact play that he hurt his wrist. He just didn't really know until he tried throwing again. Well, the Saints could have pushed back against that, even potentially telling him, if you get another surgery and go on IR just to collect this $30 million, we're going to file a grievance and contest that. That's a theory floated out by former NFL player Ross Tucker. He thinks there's a chance the Saints could have forced Carr's hand into retiring, and because of that, he's not convinced this is the last time we see of Derek Carr in the NFL. Obviously, that's just a theory, but this would be far from the first time a player announces their retirement and then ends up playing again in the NFL sometime down the road. Brett Favre, Randy Moss, Marshawn Lynch, Gronk, and even Tom Brady are just a few players who have made retirement announcements but ended up returning to play once again in the NFL. So I guess you can't rule out a return for Derek Carr completely. However, if this is the last of Derek Carr in the NFL, he's going to leave behind kind of a bit of a mixed bag of a legacy. He was drafted in the second round by the Raiders back in 2014, and he became the first rookie quarterback to start a season opener in franchise history. He actually put up some really solid numbers in his first few seasons and led them to a 12-3 record in 2016, but sadly broke his fibula in Week 16, and they lost in the wild card round. They didn't make the postseason again until 2021, where they lost to the Bengals in the wild card round, which is the only playoff game Derek Carr has played in his entire career. In spite of that, Carr is arguably the best quarterback in Raiders franchise history. He holds several records out of any quarterback to ever play for Vegas and Oakland over the years. From there, though, let's talk Saints. And his career there is very short-lived. He signed a big 4-year, $150 million deal with them in 2023, but injuries and inconsistent play never really allowed him to take off there. I think it's safe to say he was a talented quarterback who unfortunately had some serious injuries and also didn't really have the greatest teams around him for most of his career. I saw someone recently say Carr was good enough to reach the Hall of Almost, but not quite elite enough to make the Hall of Fame. Obviously, we shall see what happens there with him down the road, but that sounds like a pretty accurate assessment to me. As far as how this affects the New Orleans Saints, Carr's retirement, they're in a very interesting position here. Taysom Hill, Brandon Cooks, and Alvin Kamara are all on the wrong side of 30. Kamara is still 29, but he'll be 30 in July. Then you have uncertainty at receiver with Chris Olave having his 2024 season cut short due to multiple concussions, though the team did pick up his fifth-year option, so he is tied to the team through the 2026 NFL season at the moment. Then your other starting receiver, Rashid Shaheed, is coming off of a torn meniscus, so those are your top two receivers, with the biggest addition to the room being soon-to-be 32-year-old Brandon Cooks. They actually have the sixth oldest roster in the league heading into the 2025 season, according to SpotTrack. They then hired Kellen Moore to be their new head coach, and thankfully did draft a quarterback this year in Tyler Shuck early in the second round. So they at least have some competition in the quarterback room, with Shuck battling it out against Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener at the moment. As of right now, between those guys, Shuck might actually be the favorite to land the starting job unless he completely bombs during training camp and preseason, and here's why. They drafted Shuck with the belief he was more pro-ready than some of the other quarterbacks in this draft because of his age. He's going to be 26 in September, and he played 7 years in college. He's a little younger than Jake Haener and also happens to be exactly 1 year older than Spencer Rattler. They share the same birthday, ironically enough. Shuck isn't a finished product by any means, but he's much further along in his development process than most rookie quarterbacks. So you can feel more comfortable starting him right away, in theory, and get to quicker assessing whether or not you think you have something with Shuck. If he struggles, this team is probably picking pretty high in next year's draft or just sometime in the next couple of years anyway, so you can then go after a better QB prospect with an earlier pick this time around, maybe like Arch Manning. I don't know, his grandpa Archie played there for 11 years, so it would at least be a little poetic. Either way, with Carr out of the picture, the Saints will now have their 4th new starting quarterback to start the season in just 5 years. For what it's worth, just gonna throw this out there, Aaron Rodgers is still available. I don't think the Saints have a better roster than the Steelers by any means, but they still have a decent roster, and they also play indoors in a dome, so weather controlled, whereas Rodgers is going to freeze his balls off in Pittsburgh if he signs there. I mean, it's nothing new to the longtime veteran quarterback. He played for a long time in Green Bay, but the Saints division, here's another reason why, is definitely an easier one to potentially win than the Steelers. The Steelers are in the AFC North and have to go against the Ravens and the Bengals. One of those teams are probably winning the division. Meanwhile, the Saints are in the NFC South. You've got the Bucks, Falcons, and Panthers. I like the odds in the NFC South over the AFC North, although the Bucks are still a good team and the Panthers are definitely on the rise. Then we'll see what happens with the Falcons and Michael Penix and all that's going on over there. I'm not saying there's any real interest or anything like that, but Rodgers is probably the top quarterback still out there and potentially available, so Plus, when you look at the cap space, the Saints still have the 13th most cap space in the NFL this season now that Carr has moved on, but the Steelers have the 6th most available cap space. So they both could make a push for Rodgers. It's just a matter of where does he want to play, if he wants to play at all. Next up, someone who also used to play for the Saints is defensive end Trey Hendrickson, though of course these days he plays for the Bengals. The problem is he is not a very happy camper over there in Cincinnati at the moment. He requested a trade for the second time in a couple of years after the season ended, but the Bengals have made it clear they want to keep him even after signing Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Bengals executive VP Katie Blackburn made public comments early in April, making it seem like Trey was the one holding negotiations up and that at some point he should just be happy with their offer. So it seems like they lowballed the guy and were basically like, hey, here it is, take it or leave it, and have since basically ghosted him. Trey responded to those comments on the Pat McAfee show, by the way, saying their communication has been poor and that he's been trying to shore up a longer-term deal with more guaranteed money for the past 3 years, but they haven't given him one. Despite all that, Jeremy Fowler reported early last week that there wasn't any trade buzz involving Hendrickson, and it sounded like something was going to get worked out. Well, the reason why there was no trade buzz even before the draft is because the Bengals reportedly wanted a bunch for Hendrickson, and rightly so. He's one of the best pass rushers still in the NFL. At the same time, though, in regards to a contract, all this going on with Hendrickson, he is reportedly dug in and is even willing to miss training camp and some game action if a deal doesn't get done. I see this kind of like the Chris Jones situation a couple years ago during his holdout and wanting a new deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. So that was last week, but earlier today, Adam Schefter revealed a statement from Trey Hendrickson himself about the entire situation, and yikes. He said there's been no communication between he and the team since the draft, and the offers they made before the draft weren't what they had promised they would pay him if he continued to play at a high level. He obviously did that. He had 17.5 sacks last year, which led the entire NFL. He said that coaches are aware of these conversations as well, and that, quote, rather than using collaboration to get us to a point to bring me home to the team, they are no longer communicating. He ended by saying he's been eagerly awaiting a resolution, but it's hard when there's no discussion and an evident lack of interest in reaching mutual goals. Well, shoot, that is now twice this offseason that Trey has went public with comments not casting the organization in a great light. He's clearly frustrated. I would say that repairing his relationship seems unlikely, but at the end of the day, money covers a lot of offenses in the NFL. Myles Garrett is one recent example of this. He said he wanted to go win a Super Bowl ring. The Browns offered him a truck ton of money, and he said, okay, never mind, give me the money. The question is for Trey Hendrickson, will the Bengals actually have enough to get something done with him, at least compared to what he's wanting? They do have around $27 million in cap space heading into this season, and they could probably get creative to make it work in the short term, but it does appear typically they're unwilling to pay out larger amounts of guaranteed money. From their perspective, I get it, sorta. Trey Hendrickson is 30 years old, so the thought of giving him a 3 or 4 year extension with a lot of guaranteed money seems risky, but so does the idea of losing your best defensive player when that side of the ball was the side that held you back from being a playoff contender in the first place last season. I think they probably need to make up their minds and either pay him or trade him. Otherwise, this could get ugly. At the end of the day, they don't have to do anything. They don't have to extend him. They don't have to trade him. He can hold out and lose out on money, but they kind of hold the power here. I will say this, the Bengals have shot themselves in the foot by all accounts because they just keep waiting. They waited for Jamar Chase to earn the Triple Crown last season and had to pay him a lot of money, over $40 million per year. They then waited to make T. Higgins the highest paid wide receiver 2 in the NFL, and they are waiting once again on the Hendrickson front, and it's much more difficult now because of that. On a bit of a lighter note than contractual conflicts, we now know who the Eagles' opponent will be for the NFL kickoff game, the game that's going to start the NFL season off for 2025. I was really hoping it would either be the Commanders or Lions, but nope. It is, of course, going to be the Dallas Cowboys. The NFL knows what they're doing here. People love to hate the Cowboys, and whether anyone wants to admit it or not, people watch their games. They had the second highest average of national TV viewers last season, for example, only behind the Lions. Plus, Dallas and Philly are huge rivals within the NFC East, so it makes sense from that perspective. I think a lot of people are just looking at it saying, hey, why not the Commanders, who are also division rivals and the team they just played in the NFC Championship game, or at least the Lions, who were the 1 seed in the conference last year. Meanwhile, the Cowboys didn't even make the playoffs. Sure, Dak got hurt midway through the season, but they were 3-5 with Dak as the starter before he went down, so it's not like they were anything special before that. But still, the masses will be tuning in for this game, as will just as many, if not more, tune in for the game following the season opener on Friday, which is going to be the Chargers taking on the Kansas City Chiefs in Sao Paulo, Brazil. But hey, let me know your thoughts on the Derek Carr situation, especially from today's video, all we processed through, and what you think the Saints will end up doing next. Also, do you think Carr is for real retired, or could you see him back playing for another team before all is said and done? And then, yeah, let me know your thoughts about Aaron Rodgers to the Saints. Not saying it happens, but let me know your thoughts on all that in the comments down below. And with that, I'll see y'all next time.